Hello one and all, Jasper here, and as someone who likes to make videos on fictional characters, fighting to the death of course, I like to pretend that I actually know what I'm talking about in regards to what makes the best warriors and fighters. Key word on pretend, as like anyone on this side, I just make shit up and hope I don't get called out for it. Though naturally, I'm not the only person, and a very prominent YouTuber in the Game of Thrones community, Alt-Shift-X, made a video over a year ago on who the best warriors in Westeros were. And letting my thoughts marinate on the topic, I want to give my 2 cents on the list. If you want to see the original video, it'll be at the top of the description down below, even though I'd bet my house that all of you have already seen it. Let's start with characters who I think should not be on this list he has. Loras Tyrell at number 9. As the video itself lays out, Loras doesn't have any great feats we can use to properly judge him to be a great fighter, and it feels like his placement is mainly because George said in an interview that he was one of the greatest, but he left out Garland in that statement, who we know for a fact is a better fighter than Loras. Throw on top that Loras is only 16 years old, so still a developing young man, I don't see him competing with fully grown men like Victarion. You could probably argue for Loras being on this list if you take into account his jousting, but considering Shifty Boy here makes no mention of his jousting skills, I think it's safe to assume we are likely judging these warriors with boots on the ground. Also, if Loras makes the list because of his talent at jousting, then Rhaegar Targaryen should be here as well. Yet there is no sight of him on the list. If Pedo Incest Baby can't make it, then neither can Loras. And I'm not done with the Tyrells, as I also want to mention my disagreement with Garland Tyrell. He is obviously the better fighter than his brother. This is something that we can all agree to, so naturally, if Loras is in the top 10, then so too must Garland. However, considering I don't consider Loras to be the greatest, it shouldn't be surprising that I don't rate Garland as high either. Sparring with 3 or 4 opponents at once is impressive, but using Victarion as a benchmark since he was rated lower, he could very likely accomplish the same feat, especially since he bested Harris Harlaw, a man who defeated 7 men in combat, slaying 5 of them. Same with other characters that were placed lower than Garland, like Brienne. She's taken on multiple opponents on her own and come out on top, though I admit, the quality of these groups she beats are not exactly impressive. But I trust my own eyes in Brienne killing several men than hearsay and practice fighting. Moving on to the actual battles we've seen or heard about, it is fairly impressive, like when Garland slew several great knights during the Battle of Blackwater. However, how many of those were actual fights, and how many were those running away from Renly's ghost? Because remember, he was wearing that armor, which scared most people away and even convinced a few of the soldiers on the ground to switch sides. The only one we are sure was defeated in actual combat was Gaiard Morgan, who must be a reasonably accomplished knight as he was appointed to the Rainbow Guard and led the vanguard as ordered by Stannis. Though being a part of the van, Gaiard was probably fighting since the very start of the battle. Who knows how many injuries he suffered or how tired he was. It's personally not enough for me to place him in the top 10, though I wouldn't fault you if you disagree with me on this one. Though, with removing 2 characters, who do I think should replace them? Well, a bit of an honorable mention to Rhaegar Targaryen, who is possibly an even greater jouster than Loras, and was skilled enough to fight Robert Baratheon, who is number 4 on this list, I'd like to remind you, possibly wounding the man so severely he sent Eddard in his place to finish the war. Though I hesitate to do this for a similar reason to Garland, though. Less so. After all, this was in the chaos of a massive battle. Who is to say those injuries Robert suffered were from Rhaegar, and not the dozen of knights he slew before the duel? If the 2 engaged in a duel in a fighting pit submarine, would it still be a legend or a stomp for the stag? It's hard to say, and there are too many possible ways this could have played out. Another honorable mention is Small John Umber, since Swifty mentioned his father, the Great John. He served as Robb's bodyguard, and is described to be even bigger than his father, despite the nickname Small John, and is probably closer to the prime of his age compared to his dad. Though, that's hypothetical for me, as we don't know their exact ages, but I think it's more likely that the Small John would be the superior fighter to his father. But now to mention the 2 I think deserve to make the list, and ironically, both are honorable mentions in the original video. The first is Oberyn Martell, and everything Shift said about him is true. The only fight we see him partake in, he loses, and it's to Gregor Clegane. But let's be fair here, Oberyn was dominating that fight, and it was only at the very end when his overconfidence and rage for revenge proved to be his undoing. Plus, Gregor in this video was ranked at number 6. I don't think you can have that close of a duel with someone in the top 10 and not be considered in the same level. Do you honestly think he would lose to the likes of Victarion, who is a very similar fighter to Gregor, only smaller and likely weaker, or even Loras, since he has no deep burning hatred for either of them? I honestly would place Oberyn all the way up to number 5, between Sandor and Robert. He could honestly probably beat both of them, but I think Robert is more likely to win against more people than Oberyn in general. After all, fighting isn't as simple as A beats B, B beats C, so A can beat C. It's a lot more complicated and nuanced than that. My second option is not one I feel super strong about, though isn't that how all these lists work? We all mostly agree on who the best are, with some slight changes, but it's the bottom few which have more competition. And for me, the winner is Strong Belwas at number 10. My man bested an armored opponent on foot while the other was on horseback in single combat, suffering only a single small cut because he lets all of his opponents cut him. And unlike other single combat situations we hear about, we see this one. We know all the details. There is no risk of things being exaggerated for the sake of telling a better story. And this was a champion of Meereen, not some random asswipe. Though there are a few things that hold Belwas back. For starters, his opponent is described as wearing armor of copper and jet. Not exactly the best material, and I can't confirm if it's steel coated in copper like how Jaime wears steel armor coated in gold, and the skills of this opponent are up for debate. He was the champion of Meereen, but his uncle was also the richest man in the city, so how much of this title was skill or bribing people? Also, Belwas having a massive lack of armor would put him at a great disadvantage to most people. Still, besting a man who's riding on a horseback just on your own 2 feet is still pretty damn impressive. Okay, let's recap the list so far. Number 10, Strong Belwas. Number 9, Victarion Greyjoy. Number 8, Brienne of Tarth. Number 7, Gregor Clegane. Number 6, Sandor Clegane. Number 5, Oberyn Martell. Number 4, Robert Baratheon. Number 3, Jaime Lannister. Number 2, Barristan Selmy. And number 1, Arthur Dayne. Well, at least I agree with everyone on the list now. But I think some people need to be moved around. Smallest change first. I'm switching Sandor and Gregor. I know Mr. Swift likes to use the brief fight during the Hands tourney as proof Sandor is the better fighter, as he made no attempts to attack his brother's exposed head and only blocked the attacks. But I could easily say the aggressive push kept Sandor from making any attacks, and even if that was not the case, presumably Gregor would wear a helmet in this fictional fight. If Sandor comes back as the Gravedigger and puts Zombie Gregor in the dirt, I will happily eat all my words, but until then, the bigger brute beats the smaller brute. Now for some bigger changes. Victarion is being moved all the way up to number 7, between the Clegane brothers. As a previous video I made explains that the choice of an axe is a superior weapon against armored opponents, though I don't think it's enough to overcome the raw power of Gregor, even with his magic blood fire hand. And the biggest change is taking Robert and moving him all the way to number 1. The ludicrous size of his warhammer arguably makes him the strongest character in the series ever, aside from giants and ice people. Most of his opponents use swords, which his armor would be able to protect him against, compared to his warhammer that could cut through most of his opponents. And as I said in another video regarding Arthur Dayne against Robert, I don't think Valyrian steel is a lightsaber that can cleave through plate armor like cloth. We have seen nothing in the books that prove that, and the show has shown regular swords cutting through steel armor. But yeah, this is my thought on the video, as well as my own list. If you disagree, I'd love to hear your thoughts down below. Don't forget to check out the original video, if by some miracle you haven't already. If you liked this video, don't forget to subscribe, and until next time, I hope you all stay safe.